Can someone use AI as a cheat code to become a CISO in less time, you think?
Well, I think what it is that it isn't that you're going to become a CISO in less time. You're just going to become a better CISO. CISOs are business executives that just use technology and people and processes to manage risk.
When you think about delegating, what's the one thing that CISOs should never delegate?
I'd say accountability. My two pet peeves are: one, you don't lie. And two, if you break something, you own it.
Who says tech can't be human?
What's going on, Hacker Valley fam? Welcome back to the show. We are known to bring on some of the best guests in cybersecurity from all across the world. But this guest that I have on today, he knows the role of CISO like nobody else. My special guest is my brother, Gary Hayslip. He is the CISO at SoftBank Investment Advisers. Gary isn't just a CISO. He's actually one of the originals. He has decades of experience, not just in cyber, but also as a leader. He's served our country. He's building the future of cybersecurity in his current role as CISO at SoftBank Investment Advisers. And Gary, I know that you've done a lot. You're not just a one-time CISO or a two-time CISO. You've been a CISO many times over. But most importantly, welcome back to the show.
Brother, I'm happy to be back. I always have fun when I'm hanging out with you.
Yeah, same here. We just got to see each other at the Teammate CISO Village Summit, which was epic. So much so that everybody lost internet for a day, and that caused a lot of angst in our hearts. But the event was epic because it was CISOs learning. I've never seen CISOs with their laptop closed for so long than at this event.
Yeah, it's one of those things where especially the unconference part of it, where we broke up into groups and everybody was talking about different subjects. And it's one of maybe 3 events that I look forward to. And I always try to change, my schedules around to make sure I can go.
There was a lot of CISOs at this event. And one of the things that I like to interrogate you on, I feel like your answer is very consistent, but I think I asked you the last time that you're on the show as well. But I want to talk about the CISO role because it's still one of those roles that, it's kind of easy to say and repeat back. But when you get into the specifics of the job, it's like a can of spaghetti. But, 2025, how would you define what a CISO is?
I don't really look at it as a technical role. I actually look at it as CISOs are business executives that just use technology and people and processes to manage risk. It's like, and that's the way I've always looked at it. And when you build security teams, when you build security programs, your focus is putting together a service that takes care of your customers, which are, the stakeholders and people within the business and partners of the business. And your focus is on managing risk, managing it currently, looking long-term as the changes and stuff that are going to impact the business, and then looking at your stack and, the other departments and stakeholders that you're working with and the things that they're doing and what changes need to be made so that you're ready, for risk, you're ready for threats and things that are going to be impacting the business, and so, and the reason I say it's a business executive per se is that, it doesn't start out that way. Maybe when you're with a startup or you're with an SMB and you're with a smaller company, you're really focused on technology, and maybe you do a little bit dealing with, an executive team, or maybe a little bit dealing with, some of the, senior level stakeholders. But when the company gets larger, and organizations grow, whether it's a nonprofit or profit, whatever, when they grow, their risks change, their threats change, the technology that they use has changed. And so, your executive that you have in that job will also change. You will have someone that's not so technical focused, but may also know technology, but now they are soft skills focused. They are, people focused. They are, they're dealing with, executives and partners, and they're dealing with boards, and it becomes more strategy. You may be very technical heavy at the beginning, but the more senior you get in the role, the more you've done this multiple times, your focus changes. And I do think you become more focused when you're tuned to the business, when you're tuned to, how you support the business and you help it grow, and honestly, you help the business protect itself from itself sometimes because of decisions that are made or things that they have to do.
I like the perspective of business executive because that's a boss. And I think, CISOs definitely are bosses because they typically have many people reporting into them, probably more than most, if not all, in the security organization. And I would imagine that part of your job is delegating. So I had a funny question for you. When you think about delegating, what's the one thing that CISOs should never delegate?
I'd say accountability. I mean, you may have multiple direct reports and you'll have teams doing different things, but you are still held accountable overall for the whole program. You are still held accountable for, and I go ahead and I tell, the people that work for me, I said, my two pet peeves are: one, you don't lie to me, and two, if you break something, you own it. In cyber, we're going to break things. And I'm not going to chew your butt that you broke something. I'm going to chew you out if you keep on breaking the same thing over and over again and you don't learn from the mistake. I mean, if you break something, we as a team are going to come together. We're going to fix it. We're going to go on about our business. And I'm not going to hold that against you. But my thing is that you own it so that we can then work together as a team to fix it, and you don't lie about it. And then as a CISO, you're always going to be accountable. So even if one of your people or one of your direct reports, one of your teams does something that's a mistake, yeah, you may one-on-one, because, you praise in public and you chew out in private, but facing outside the security team, it's you. The accountability is you. No one chews out my teams. Nobody chews out my people. That's me. I will manage that. I will take care of that. And if any kind of, heat is coming down from up above, it lands on me. I am accountable. You never give up that accountability piece because it's your program. These are your people. These are your teams. You take care of your people.
Being at SoftBank Investment Advisers, I'd imagine that you see a lot of security startups. You probably deal with a lot of security teams on the enterprise side. What is the biggest dysfunction that CISOs are typically a part of when it comes to security teams? Like, where do you all get in your own way?
I think one of the biggest, honestly, one of the biggest issues I find where we get in our own way is we get so focused in the technology. We get so focused in hunting the threats and so focused in, oh, this is cool. And you can do this and look at this. And, and you're, and you forget that honestly, the hardest part of the job is managing expectations. It's managing the people that are our customers. And it's managing what they're expecting from us, the services that we're providing them. And I think where we get into, where we get in our way is we get comfortable sitting in a box. We get comfortable with nobody knowing what we're doing because we're behind the scenes and and we go ahead and we do our thing and we can exist back there and no problem whatsoever. The problem is that you're not going to get the funding and resources you need because people don't understand what you're doing or why you're doing it, but if you're visible and people see the value that you're bringing and you're available for questions, you're available to help with projects, and they start understanding the impact of how one thing like dominoes, one piece will click another piece, and these things start, growing your risk or start growing impact where they're going to hurt services or break a product, which is then going to break contracts that you have with customers on that product. We get used to being in a box because it's so easy for us to be, hidden behind the scenes and nobody's looking for us, and I'm like, no. You have to be comfortable being out there, being present, being available, being visible, and so that way people can ask you questions. That way you're aware of what they're doing so that you can stop them if they're going to break something, or, you can help them to where it's done correctly. And then also I just look at it, you in the long run, you're more effective because the biggest part of your job is change. You're going to change the way people do things. You're going to change the way we've always done this here. We've always done it, this way. And it's always been easy for us. What do you mean we got to do this? And so there's going to be times as a CISO and as a security team member and as a security team leader, you're going to have to make changes. You're going to have to do things that the business people within the business, they're going to clap back. They're going to chirp. They're going to be mad because you're making changes. But if you're visible, they know what you're doing, they trust you, they're going to be a little bit more welcoming to what you're doing because they understand that there's a reason for it and that, the company is going to be better off for it. You have to have that visibility to be able to, so people know what you're doing, and we do. Unfortunately, many of us get very comfortable, with the door closed, back in the background. We got to do our thing. Nobody's bothering us. That's only going to get you so far.
Accountability is so tough. It's tough because that means you're taking ownership, and as obvious as it is that someone should take ownership of things that they're responsible for or play a huge part in, we try to hide things sometimes, especially if it's our first time in the role. I can only imagine first time CISO gets breached and it's like, oh my gosh, like, how am I gonna tell everybody about this? And it reminds me of like one time when I was first getting my hand a shot at security engineering. There was this, I was working as a network engineer as part of a company that would resell gear. And we would typically resell the gear and it'd be pre-configured. So I had to configure some Cisco routers, and then it ultimately I ultimately restarted on mistake a few routers that hadn't been down for like 11 years. And 11-year uptime might sound ridiculous, especially today, because it is. But back then, 11 years was like, you wanted that 5 nines.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of courage for me, especially being early in my career, to own it up and say, that's my bad.
Oh, yeah. When you're accountable for a mistake, your mistakes usually have an impact.
Yeah.
We don't make mistakes and nobody notices. Usually mistakes in security, they break something.
We see CrowdStrike, right? Like CrowdStrike brought the airline industry to its knees and many other industries as well. But yeah, it's crazy. Has there been any crazy experiences from your perspective, like early lessons or lessons that you've heard from other people that you're like, oh man, it happens, but maybe you just got a little egg on your face at a time?
I was a civil service employee with the U.S. Navy, as a CISO, and my CIO, who was big into technology as well, his office and mine were right next to each other, and we decided that we were going to help install an UPS, one of these big, huge, UPSs with these big battery bays in them. And we didn't bother to read the paperwork. We knew how to do this. We got years of experience and everything. And we're setting this up, and the batteries look relatively the same as the previous batteries. And we're trying to fit them in the bays. And all these things were for was, if we lost power, within the server room area, we'd be able to keep all the servers up for everything to be able to be shut down, And so we're kind of setting everything up, and we really weren't paying attention to these big, long battery things that we were sliding in. And one of them really wasn't fitting right. And my boss is on the backside of the UPS, and he's looking at it, and he's like, just give it a shove. Just go ahead and hit it. So I'm just looking at it. I'm like, all right. I go ahead, and I slam it. And dude, it was probably the biggest spark of blue lightning I've ever seen in my life.
Whoa.
That just, that went flying across the room, put a big black hole in the wall that was smoking, and it basically blew out one of the battery bays on the back of this new UPS that we had just bought. And my boss is standing there behind the thing because the thing had arced like around him. Ooh. And he's sitting there kind of smoking and he's looking at me, and he's holding the stub of a screwdriver because it had basically melted the screwdriver that he had in his hand. And he wasn't hurt, but we're both looking at each other and we're like, let's not tell our wives what we just did. And that was the thing where I'm just kind of like, we probably could have let our employees do this. We didn't really need to do this. And because they probably would have read the directions,
right.
Vice us just thinking we knew what we were doing, so I laugh at it now, but at the time, we both realized, okay, we just blew up about $40,000 worth of equipment.
Oh, and almost lost your hands. I mean, a good thing the plastic, someone had the bright idea to put plastic on the screwdriver and rubber.
Yeah, and there was kind of a lot of lessons learned after that. Him and I kind of went to lunch and and had a drink or two. We were just kind of like, okay, let's not do that or anything stupid like that again. I kind of laugh about it now, but you realize that there are things that you've got to that your team members can do. You don't have to go ahead and do them. This is how they grow and how they learn. And even if you've done it, a config on a router 100 times, still read the documentation, still go ahead and read through it and follow it. You know what I'm saying? And it's just one of those kind of things that, there's a reason why you put together a run book. There's a reason why you put together a KB article for your level 1 technicians to follow, is because you want them to follow it every time. Even you at an executive level should be following directions and following things. You're paid to go ahead and for the results. You're not paid for the stupid stuff that you're doing in the middle.
That reminds me so much of what you said, when we saw each other last time, because for anyone that doesn't know, a lot of times I get to see all of these amazing people like Gary through conferences and events. And I did an interview with you at the Teammate CISO Village Summit, and you mentioned one of the biggest lessons or the biggest piece of advice that you can give a first-time CISO is trust your team. I think trust is a hard thing. And, it seems like work feels a little more emotional than it's ever felt. Maybe it's because we work from home and like you're not seeing someone, you don't like get to see their kids in the office. Maybe that's part of why it feels, a little different when someone doesn't trust you. But like, I wanted to unpack that and expand, like, how do you trust your team, especially if you're first getting to know them?
The biggest thing, I look at with my teams and how you build trust in them is you start out by, you first, you meet them, you start getting to know them, you start finding out their impact and how well they work together within themselves, how well they work together with stakeholders and departments and the business units around them. You start finding out how well they're doing with projects and how well they do with deliverables. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll come up with a project and I'll give it to them, and I want to see how well they work together to plan it, and then how well they actually work together to execute and to start doing pieces of it. And I'll let them run with it, and I'll periodically check in, but it's more of me kind of like just looking over the shoulder and just watching what they're doing and letting them do their thing and run with it, and only step in if I need to adjust. But otherwise, I'll let the team lead and them do their thing and then be able to deliver. So, but it's a learning thing. I mean, the trust your team piece takes time. It does, and that's one of the biggest things I go ahead and I tell CISOs. The trust piece, it comes up a lot, and because nobody wants to micromanage. Nobody wants to have to go ahead, especially with you're dealing with larger teams. You don't have time to go ahead and be chasing 100, 150 people. You've got 4 or 5 direct reports, and you're going to be trusting them to be able to manage their individual teams. But you still have to know when good is good. And getting that level of trust, of understanding when good is good. And after you've done a couple of those, you'll get an idea, okay, this team is mature enough, I can trust them. And so then it's just doing one-on-ones, with the direct reports, who are managing those teams, maybe sitting in on their sprints every once in a while, just so that you've got visibility and they know who you are. But otherwise, you let them be and do their thing. And then those that aren't, clicking on all cylinders, you may have to step in and change a team lead out. You may have to step in, and unfortunately, I've had once or twice where I've ended up having to let people go, just because their negativity, the whole world sucks, and I'm just going to suck it all in with me. That will destroy a team
Quickly. I've seen that happen firsthand.
Yeah, and it's like, and it isn't one of those things that you can just let it go for a while. Maybe it'll work itself out. No. If you're managing high performance teams, you have to step in. And that's part of that, the whole trust piece as you're building these teams out, is once you've got teams that you trust, they will hold themselves accountable.
I wanted to break that down a little bit, because checking in is an important piece. I hope that everyone would agree that you should check in with your team. There's some people that have operated, especially as leaders, and I would say many individual contributors as well, where they've been given pure autonomy. So like any type of check-in might feel a little bit invasive at first, because it's like, oh, well, I'm going from not having meetings with my stakeholders or management to having bi-weekly or weekly meetings. And now I feel as though maybe I'm being micromanaged. Where is the line? Like if somebody got the feedback from one of their direct reports and said, I think you're micromanaging me, how would you be able to dissect that thought and determine whether or not you are?
Again, it comes down to their definition of micromanaging. I go ahead and I look at, especially if I'm dealing with a direct report, typically what we'll do is, we'll set it to where it's, an hour, and in that hour, a portion of it's mine. I'm checking in with them. You got any blockers? How are you doing with such and such projects? How's the team, the team members going? Is there anything I need to know? And that may be 20 minutes of the hour. And then the other 40 minutes is theirs. From a professional standpoint, like one of my guys, here in the Menlo Park office where I'm at, him and I, walk on down to Phil's Coffee. We'll get coffee. And in that time, we'll go ahead and we'll chat. And a lot of it is actually career focus of where he's going, what projects he likes working on, technologies and things that he's doing and questions that he might have. And so you look at what him and the team are doing and the projects, and I want to know that they're on track. And if there's anything that's, in the way, anything that I can do to go ahead and assist and just make sure that they're on track and that they're ready to be able to do their deliverables. But the rest of the time, it's focused for him. Sometimes he, we may actually be talking about a recent breach or something in, at a Wired, or something out of, Hacker News or something he saw in Hacker Valley. Hey, Ron was talking about this. What do you think about that? And we'll have a discussion. Sometimes it's, about, he's looking at doing some courses in AI, and we'll start discussing, stuff like that and making some recommendations because I'm looking ahead of things that we might want to do as a team. And he's already thinking what he should do from a career perspective, but also at the same time, what he should do to help out, the business. And if one of them said, well, I feel like I'm micromanaging, I'd be like, dude, I'm not controlling every decision you make. I'm not sitting there saying you have to go ahead and tell me everything that you're doing and that I will make a decision, yes or no, if you can do that. I'm letting you do that. What I am doing is making sure that you give me visibility for what you guys are doing. And the reason is my job is to talk to everybody up above. My job is to keep people out of the way so you can do what you need to do. My job is, as I'm talking to executives and the other business units around you who are doing projects, who are making changes, who are partnering with partners and making billion-dollar deals and stuff like that, I'm verifying that things that we're working on are not going to interfere with that. I'm verifying that we're providing a service that they can use so that they can be secure while they do their jobs. I'm letting you do your thing. I'm just providing you the insight that you need in the awareness. So you have situational awareness around you of how you fit in that greater puzzle. And then if you feel like I'm bothering you too much, well, let's discuss that. Why do you think that? Well, and if they're like, well, I'm totally autonomous. Nobody's ever asked me, Well, guess what? You've been running in a different type of organization, but that doesn't work. You need to have some type of feedback. And that's all I'm giving you is feedback as to where you're going and adjustments you might need to make because of things that I know in my role. Otherwise, I'm still letting you go. You still manage your team. You still got a job to do. You still got to go execute and get it done. 15 years from now, when I retire, I want to be able to look back and look at all the different CISOs and all the people that I've helped, while I'm continuing to work with startups and continuing to work with executive teams. I want to know that I've helped all of these people and that, like Rick McElroy and I've said before, we left it better than we found it.
Powerful. I love that. And, I think that's one of the things that I've learned over time when I thought someone was being a micromanager. It's that I wasn't giving visibility. Like if someone that you feel as though is always in your business that is overseeing your job, you might want to just give them the updates that they're asking for. I have a history of being late, something that I've been able to tackle and overcome for the most part. Still working on it, but one of the things that when I tell my team, details about my life, they sometimes get a surprise. They're like, oh, "Wow, Ron, I didn't know that you love to eat sweets on the weekends. Like I didn't know that, pistachio ice cream is one of your favorites. I thought you never ate ice cream." As I know, like I eat ice cream and, I make mistakes and I learn from them. But there are still times as a leader, and I think this is just a evolution of getting better at what you do is sometimes you get nervous. Like some people will say imposter syndrome. I would say it's more, when I get nervous, it's more of like not being the best at it quite yet and still having to learn and, putting myself out there to a degree. What would you say is like your superheroes do cry, attribute, that the thing that it still makes you a little nervous sometimes?
I mean, I've been at this for 20 plus years and I still get imposter syndrome on things, because at times I'm just like, just how far I've come, being senior enlisted, and then going ahead and, and I'm sitting on boards with, 4-star generals, and I'm talking to people, who was the previous Secretary of Defense or the previous Secretary of the Treasury, and we're on, advisory boards together. And I'm just like, and I never would have thought decades after I left the Navy that I'd be where I'm at. And I still have imposter syndrome, and I still have things where, am I doing it good enough? Do I know enough? And I think it's one of those things that as leaders, you should always have, humility. You should always understand that you're never going to know everything. You're never going to be able to do everything perfect, and so it's one of those things that I guess for me is just, staying humble, and staying the fact that there's always going to be people that know things better than you, or, you may know something about a project or know something, better than everybody in the room, but the individual pieces of it, may be known very, very well by certain people on teams and everything. And you've got to be willing to give them their grace and their growth to be able to shine and to be able to contribute. And so that you as an executive can pull it all together to be able to complete, whatever the mission was, and so the hardest thing for me at times is just, being okay with not knowing, and being okay with just being humble and understanding that there's going to be things that you're just not going to know, but be okay with that, because that's what you have your team members for. That's why you have stakeholders, and other business units who are going to know pieces, and you want to have those relationships with them. That's the reason why you have peers within the CISO community. There's going to be times where you're just like, okay, I've never dealt with something like this before. Let me just go ahead and jump on Slack. And next thing I know, I got 15 CISOs weighing in who've done different things, and they're all giving, their, your input. And now you don't feel as bad. You're like, oh, okay, this is actually normal. And this is how you as an executive grow as well.
When we look at growth, a lot of us, when we're starting and embarking on a new journey, we want to know hacks. Like, if especially after you hit a wall, you're like, all right, I need a hack. And, like some people, sometimes, people will do this with diets and even certifications. Like, all right, I'm going to buy a certification guide and study the test rather than the subject. What are your thoughts on AI being a CISO? I see a lot of YouTubers out there that say, hey, I'm having AI be the CEO of my company, and I'm going to ask AI to do everything. And I just saw an article where someone was mentioning that it was Anthropic. They mentioned that they had Claude run a soda machine, and it ended up bankrupting the company because it started to satisfy orders that they weren't coming in frequently, and it ended up spending all the money on these little tungsten ice cubes. Can someone use AI as a cheat code to like become a CISO in less time, you think?
Well, I think what it is that it isn't that you're going to become a CISO in less time. You're just going to become a better CISO. Would be the best way I would look at it. Most CISO roles require you to have, the first CISO role that you probably would get a chance to actually sit in the seat and actually have the title and the responsibility, you're probably looking at about 8 years of experience. You're not going to shortchange that with AI. Okay. And then the more senior is anywhere between 10 to 15 years of experience. And they're looking at progressive experience, larger teams, more of a larger remit, larger organizations, more responsibility per se. I think what AI does for you as a CISO, and like we're using it with my security teams here, is that I think you're more effective with the decisions that you make. You understand the data and the context of, the business per se better. You can do things, say you can do things faster. We're looking at my security stack right now, and we're looking at technologies that we can change out or collapse, where we can integrate, AI into them. We're also looking at, tools that all of a sudden that we've been using, for the last couple of years that now have AI modules in them, because everybody's adding AI to their, to their platforms, and so we're looking at, how we integrate and use those AIs. We're looking at tools like Tines, where we can integrate things together and build workflows and their new workbench LLM, to where we can go, okay, we're going to take our security tools and our processes together. Now let's figure out how we can weave them together to make a more stable process, and for incident response or for insider threat. And what we find is, instead of having the regular 5 or 6 step process, we now break it down to a 3-step process instead of, what I'm saying? So you're not using AI to replace things. You're just we're currently using AI to help us automate and improve current processes that we have. And also we're looking at ways in which we can use it to where the data and the things that it provides has more context, so we better understand, what we're doing as a team, and then we just built we're building a GPT right now. It's going to be business facing, and it's going to be for the non-technical business units. They can go talk to Rocky, because it's Rocky the Raccoon is what we're calling it, and Rocky is there to answer security questions. And what we're doing is we're preloading all of our all of our KB articles and all of our policies and stuff into the back end of it and everything like that. And so when people ask, hey, why do I have to go ahead? Why does my password have to be 10 characters? It can go in there and say, well, because, SoftBank information security policy says da-da-da-da, and it's based on, NIST, da-da-da-da, and it's able to answer, specific questions, or it can refer them over to Jira to submit a ticket, to request assistance, or, you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like a first step for them dealing with the security team, because a lot of times they have basic questions and they just don't want to ask anybody. Well, now they can ask somebody. And so we're trying to do stuff like that, to where we can get, security more embedded, into these departments and get people to think about security ahead of time, and so yeah, it's, AI is one of those things where I think it's here to stay. You're not going to replace the CIO. You're not going to replace like the CISO role, but the CISO role is going to be different. And I'm expecting that there's going to be a merge of security and risk. And I'm even seeing a merge of the CISO and CIO roles as well, because it's technical risk and it's, and it's security threats and all these things are kind of coming together, and I think AI is just going to be in the middle of it.
What are your thoughts on the things that AI shouldn't help the CISO role with quite yet? Like, I would say like early GPT 3.5, it was not the best AI coding assistant, but now it's pretty darn good. What are the things that you would not trust it with quite yet for, the questions that you have or the things that you do?
Well, I wouldn't trust it, to be part of it like an automated process. We have an alert that kicks off, it goes over, the GPT looks at it and says it's this, so go sandbox this user or go kill this application. I would never allow it to go ahead and, automatically do something. Instead, I would have it evaluate and then alert one of my team to go take a look at it, or evaluate it and then start a process. And then my team steps in to make a decision as to, okay, yes, that is a true positive, execute, and the reason is I find it still lacks context. There's still some things within the business, where, okay, we've got controls and, we've got policy in place that you typically wouldn't do this. However, this is a one-off. We've got we got a one-off project that's spun up and then we need to go ahead and get this done for a regulatory, reason. Otherwise we go back to normal business, processes. Those kind of one-offs, those kind of things where there's not a lot of context, there's not a lot of data around it, those kind of things, you still need humans to help with that kind of stuff. I definitely think the people that you hire today are going to be very different than the people that you hired yesterday. I mean, I hired somebody on my team. He's been with the team now 3 months, and I looked for experience with JSON scripting, because you're doing prompts, you're building queries inside these GPTs, and so I wanted someone that had experience with JSON scripting, that was already doing stuff with GPTs, that already had experience with, with Claude, and already had experience with Chat GPT, and was already comfortable with using AI tools. And what I was looking at was, and I wasn't just looking for experience within the business. I was looking at, what projects are you doing at home? What are you building at home? What are you doing at DEF CON? What are you doing at B-Sides? And I will add that into part of the job description, and part of the interview. And so I think, in some ways in security, that stuff's already changing. I mean, I've had people reach out to me about CISO roles that they wanted to hire me for, and some of the questions they were asking about were AI related, because their businesses are looking at AI, and they're looking at incorporating and making that change. And they want to know, hey, have you written policy on that already? Have you already stood up committees on that? Do you understand about doing guardrails and training staff to do prompt engineering and stuff? Have you already built GPTs and stuff like that? I mean, and it all comes from experience. It all comes from, running teams and doing this individually in the business.
Wow. You can't even hold a candle to the pure strength of just human experience. I think that's really what you're describing is, yeah, it's going to help, but you still need the experience.
And the thing about this is, I think, some of the agents, some of the stuff that, the Chat GPT and some of that are coming out, yeah, you're going to have ones that work extremely well as a level one troubleshooter, or as a developer. They're going to be able to build things, and teams are going to use them extensively, in their sprints, and they're going to be using them for, projects, that they're working on. And I honestly think there's going to be a time where a CISO is going to have so many humans that are on the team, and so many digital, team members as well. And you're going to have technologies that are going to be used to manage those digital team members and what they are doing, and what access rights they have, and what data and things that they are changing and doing to make sure they're not doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But I don't think we're there yet to where I can just go ahead and retire and let somebody else, do a digital equivalent of me. I think it's going to be a while yet.
It will be a long time. Your job is safe, and you're also paving the way, like you said. You're mentoring dozens of CISOs, and probably mentor dozens of CISOs over your career. Gary, I wanted to say thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day, jumping on the ones and twos, talking about the current state, and also a little bit about your previous history about being a CISO. For anyone that hasn't already done so, be sure to check out the show notes or description wherever you're listening or watching to stay connected with Gary. And with that, we will speak to everybody next time.